Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to everyone who has joined us from across the globe, and greetings depending on whatever time zone you're joining us. My name is Princess Ofor, the SPE Lagos Section Publicity Secretary, and on behalf of the section, I'll be moderating this particular webinar. This webinar is titled An Overview of Well Flow Dynamics Across the Life Cycle, and that will be taken by a distinguished lecturer by name Ali Hamid. Now, before we progress further into today's insightful webinar, I'd just like to share with you some few safety tips and virtual meeting etiquettes that would help us make the most of today's section. So we know that we are still in the era of COVID, and there are lots of protocols that are in place for us to manage this. So it's necessary that we stick to washing our hands frequently. We use an alcohol-based sanitizer. We wear the nose mask and try to also avoid large gatherings. And then if you feel any symptoms, please isolate and follow whatever is the applicable COVID-19 guidelines in your region. For here in Nigeria, there are guidelines stipulated by NCDC, and then they can be reached by the toll-free number that you're seeing in front of the screen. Now, because this is a virtual meeting, it's very important for us that we try to avoid any distractions so that we can make the best of this. And please do not take this if you are driving, so that you are not distracted, as your safety is equally a priority. To progress further, I would like to introduce Mr. Ali Hamid. He has more than 15 years of work experience in the oil and gas industry. Throughout this time, he has worked in both operations as well as services, mainly in the domain of production engineering and flow assurance. In his last role, he managed the production and flow assurance services in Schlumberger, where he worked with experts from across the world to deliver services and solutions in upstream and midstream. Ali has a master's degree in petroleum engineering from the Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. It's my humble privilege to welcome Mr. Ali Hamid to take us further in today's webinar. Mr. Ali, please, over to you.
And thanks, Princess. Thank you very much for the introduction. Let me start sharing my presentation just for a second. Can you please confirm that you see my presentation?
Yes.
Brilliant. Good. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today from wherever you are in this beautiful world. It's a sunny day outside, so it's here in the UK, quite a beautiful day. Also, thanks to SPE Lagos for the invitation and organizing this webinar. In the next half an hour, I will be talking about an overview of well flow dynamics across the life cycle. Toward the end, there will be time for questions, and if there is anything else that we don't get the time to answer today, please feel free to drop us an email and ask your question, and we'll try to follow it up. So without further ado, I will go through the agenda for our webinar, which is as follows. First of all, I will give an introduction to well life cycle. Then after that, we will touch upon the well flow states, the two most common ones. And then I will be giving you an examples of well flow dynamics. And out of that exhaustive list, we will dive deep into two of them that are quite common. One for the oil wells, which is slugging, and we talk about what is it and why and as well as what are the solutions. And we cover one for gas wells, which is liquid loading. And I will also now share with you the gas well deliquification techniques. So what we see here on the screen are the four distinct stages of. I hear a beep on my side. Is there anything? I see some people are okay and in the lobby. So we see four distinct stages of the well life cycle. We usually start with planning phase, and then moving forward to drilling and completion. And after that comes the exciting part, which is production. And after production, then toward abandonment and decommissioning. The production stage has got three main subsets that are quite distinct: the startup and ramp up, the steady plateau, and the decline. So it is important to mention that most of the critical decisions and operations are made during the drilling and completion, and as well as the production stage. They have an impact on the return of investment. So it is then critical that we use the best technologies, available technologies, and the domain knowledge to really design, analyze, or verify the integrity, the effectiveness, and the robustness of the proposed solutions during these two stages, the drilling and completion, and the production. As I said, they have huge impact because all decisions that we make here, they have huge impact on the return on investment. So now let's dive deeper into each one of these stages and see what sort of operations and decisions need to be made during each stage. Here I've got a typical, I would say, these days it's quite typical to have a horizontal well, so a typical well schematic. Um, and then in each and on the top right, you will see a stage that comes into green, and we will be talking through some of the operations and decisions that we cover. So during drilling and completion, the most important possibly decision or design that needs to be made is to come up with the right well trajectory for the well. The well trajectory needs to ensure that we get the maximum recovery and the drainage from the drilled area. And therefore, it needs to be carefully studied that through this trajectory, we establish the maximum contact with the reservoir layers, and we ensure that there won't be any early gas or water breakthrough happening. There won't be any slugging due to sumps or U-shaped sections in the well, or if there is anything like that to happen, that will be deferred as much as possible. Also, during this stage, or possibly a bit prior to that, we designed the tubing size. So it is also crucial to select the optimum tubing size based on the well potential. Um, it needs to be ensured that we don't choose a small tubing because that might cause erosion and accessibility issues to the well, or it won't be a large tubing because that would also cause flow instability or liquid loading quite early in the life of the well. Also, the third and also quite important decision and design to be made is the artificial lift. Artificial lift system that needs to be carefully studied and selected if it's needed throughout the life of the well, whether it is an ESP, plunger lift, a gas lift, rod pump, based on the type of the fluid and the reservoir properties. Um, it, the performance of such system needs to be studied carefully. So now if we move on to the startup and ramp up stage, which comes right after the drilling and completion, the first critical operation in this stage is the cleanup. And the cleanup is an operation basically that we back produce the drilling fluids to the surface. Um, Whatever that has been used and left into the well during that stage needs to be cleaned up to the surface, right? So there won't be any damage to the formation or to the Neo-Wellbore area. And by cleaning up that properly, we realize the well deliverability, right? So it is critical that this operation is designed and executed properly, and such that there won't be any unwanted fluids or solids left into the well or in the Neo-Wellbore area. During this stage, we might need to have some assistance. It is quite possible that the well won't be able to back produce the drilling fluid. So we might need to have a nitrogen lift. And again, if that's the case, the amount of the nitrogen or the volume of the nitrogen that is needed for the operation, the rate of the nitrogen injection, and the depth of the injection need to be carefully studied. However, if our well is already equipped with an artificial lift system, um, a procedure needs to be developed and implemented on how to carefully use that artificial lift system which is in place to assist the cleanup and ensure a safe and efficient operation happening in that stage. As soon as the well starts to flow, then the thermal transient starts to manifest here. In the tubing itself, in the annular space between the tubing and the casing, and as well as on the wellhead, which will change the temperature and the pressure. So we need to have to ensure that to avoid any integrity issues, we have a proper procedure in place on how to manage those thermal transients as they start to evolve. Then as we start to gather some flow data and the well starts to flow, we will use those to get a better understanding of the IPR and tune the IPR. We do lots of nodal analysis to come up with the operating point of the well and what should be the choke setting at the surface. When the well comes to the plateau, the production plateau stage, tuning the IPR and matching the well correlation using the production data, this will start to become a frequent exercise. Then after that, nodal analysis and choke setting will be updated quite frequently to determine the bomb hole pressure, the tubing head pressure, and we might also need to do some artificial lift adjustments to improve the well performance as we're going from one setting to the other setting, most likely for the choke. So now going to the next stage, which is the decline stage and possibly the most critical one. In addition to tuning and updating the IPR, the pressure and temperature profiles, and the nodal analysis and choke setting, many transient phenomena start to happen and prevail basically the operation during this stage. As here the reservoir pressure starts to decline and the phase fraction starts to evolve and change, what we might get is a liquid liquid accumulation in the uneven part of the well, the horizontal section, or the sumps, the so-called sumps. This can happen in wells that have a large bore size, and the high GORs, basically low CGR, or low liquid content, and high GOR. Then what will happen is that the well starts to struggle to discharge the liquid from the horizontal section as it approaches the hill and create a so-called terrain slugging. The other common issue or phenomena is the gas breakthrough or the water coning during this stage. These are the so-called Neo-Wellbore effects. Um, in horizontal wells, this is particularly common as the drawdown across the sand face is not even, most likely toward the heel of the well. So we have a pressure difference here that is higher than everywhere else, and that might cause early gas breakthrough or water coning. Um, if it's a gas well, then at this stage, toward the lower gas velocity, the well will struggle to displace the liquid film and the liquid droplets to the surface, and we will start to see the liquid loading happening. And if that's the case, then this would be the time to either implement or engage the artificial lift system that we have in the well, or a deliquification technique to ensure that the liquid is produced to the surface. If we don't have an artificial lift system, then this is when we start to implement a nitrogen lift, not only specifically for liquid loaded wells, but also for oil wells that start to have high water cut, and the well will not be able to restart by itself after each shutdown. So we need to make sure that we assist the unloading process by implementing a nitrogen lift. Also, the other type of the operation that can happen during this stage is bullheading of chemicals into the wells. Depending on the purpose of the operation, it might be just some fluids like diesel or xylene to clean out some solids, for example, asphaltene or wax, or it could be a bit more severe or harmful chemicals like acids. Instead of basically putting the acid in front of the layer, we pump the acid from the surface. So if that's the case, then a careful study needs to be made that the pumping rate and pressure is not so high to go beyond the fracture gradient of the reservoir or the producing layer. The last stage would be the abandonment. So in this stage, also there is not although there is not a lot of dynamics or transients happening, we might come across two only. One is again bullheading of chemicals into the well that I talked about in the previous slide, but the other one is cross flow. And if we have got a well that basically is producing from multi-layers, or if the cement quality behind the casing is not good enough um, to seal across the porous media, there might be an accessibility issue. So when we shut in the well, we won't be able to place a plug in front of the every layer due to accessibility of leaving a fish or whatever into the well. Um, the type of the transient that we might get here is causing a cross flow from one layer to the other, as we might have imbalanced pressures between the different layers. So now let's move into the well flow states. And as I said quite early, I will be just touching on two of the most typical ones, the steady state and the dynamic. So in a steady state, what we might have, as we all know, we have constant or semi-constant parameters across the well, different from the surface all the way to subsurface. And one point that characterizes this state is the crossing of the VLP versus the IPR on the right hand side, or on the friction dominated area, basically. And if we introduce any disturbance into the well, like changing the choke, the well will settle quite quickly to another stable condition. On the other hand, we have got the transient or the dynamic one. And the dynamic one happens when the operating point shifts from the right hand side of this curve to the left hand side, and it might cross the VLP in one or two points. In this case, if we introduce any disturbance into the well, although it is currently unstable, it moves, the well state will move to another unstable condition. So what are the examples of well flow dynamics or transients? As I said, the list is quite long, but here I have an example of the most common ones, like the kick, the blowout, and the well kill that might happen during the drilling and completion stage. The well cleanup by itself, there are lots of transients involved in there, as we get um, the backflow of different phases to the surface, followed by the production fluid. Wellbore slugging, the shut-in itself, although this shut-in can happen during the steady state or the steady plateau, the shut-in by itself, it's a transient phenomena, as we have got three different phases happening during this stage. You have the phase segregation, the back seepage of the liquid into the well, and the pressure and temperature surge at the surface. Um, then startup and bean up. Um, During this stage, as I mentioned earlier, we get the thermal transients changing, which would change the density of the fluid, and the pressure and the hydrostatic head of the column. The gas well liquid loading, the gas lift instabilities, cross flow among laterals and zones, the cold tubing nitrogen lift, or kickoff, and as well as the thermal expansions and cool down. So I've selected the wellbore slugging for this presentation, and the gas well liquid loading, the first one for the oil well and the second one for the gas well. So let's look at what is slugging. Slugging is characterized by alternating flow of liquid and gas, which is basically resulting in unstable behavior. And typically there are three different types of slugging known in the industry: hydrodynamic slugging, terrain slugging, and operational slugging. Looking at the hydrodynamic slugging, this is caused by a high gas velocity flowing over low liquid phase. An obvious example of that is the air sweeping over the liquid interface or water interface close to the shore, creating waves, right? At some point across our flow system, that will, as you can see in the picture on the right hand side, as those waves tend to become bigger and bigger along the flow path, it will start to block or bridge across the flow area and creates slugs. So hydrodynamic slugging, if we look at this into the context of the well, this can happen in the horizontal section of the well, provided that we have a large wellbore size and a relatively long wellbore section. The other type is terrain slugging, and this is a bit different as it requires an undulation across the flow path. So what happens here is the liquid accumulates at the low point of the flow path, and there is not sufficient pressure to discharge it to the surface. So it takes time for that pressure to build up behind it, and there will be a point in time that the pressure will overcome that liquid hydrostatic head and will be able to push it to the surface, causing a surge of liquid. When we think about the well, the train slugging can happen at the heel of the horizontal section or in vertical wells as the pressure declines. The third type is operational slugging, and as the name basically say it, this is quite related to the type of the operation that is happening in the field. In the context of the pipeline, this could be either a pigging, as the pig sweeps the liquid into the pipeline, and when it gets to the outlet, it delivers that liquid, which creates a huge surge. In the context of the well, the plunger lift is basically follows the same concept as a pigging, but in a vertical section. So um, the attempt here is that the plunger will collect most of the liquid, and as it travels to the surface, it delivers it to the surface, creating a liquid surge or liquid slug. But for us as production engineers or subsurface engineers, this slugging has got a different terminology depending on where it happens across the well. So these are classified into three terminologies. The first one is the tubing heading. And the tubing heading is when we have large fluctuations across the tubing, mostly driven by changes in the pipeline or downstream of the choke. And our choke is now operating in a critical way. The other type or the other terminology is casing heading. And as the name say it, this is related to instabilities or changes in the pressure in the casing. For example, if we have a gas lift and gas injected in the casing and doesn't have sufficient pressure to push the liquid from the tubing, then that takes time for the pressure to build up at some point and push itself through the tubing and deliver that liquid to the surface. The other scenario would be a well without a packer. We don't have those type of wells anymore, but back in the 80s and 90s in Middle East, there are still a lot of wells that are completed without packer, and the gas from the formation basically accumulates in the annular section and acts as a buffer, and at some point that buffer pressure starts to fluctuate, creating casing heading, which eventually creates a slugging into the well. And the third type is formation heading. This formation heading is mainly driven by changes in the pressure and rate across the sand face. And as I pointed out to that a bit earlier, for formation heading, we need to have a large wellbore size for it to happen. So we all know that well slugging is basically undesirable because it causes issues with controlling the system, whether it is the well, the pipeline, the process facility. It causes also inefficient phase separation, liquid carryover in the process facility, production loss. For the well itself, it might cause an early sand production, gas breakthrough, or water coning, as the well slugging would mean that we will have a fluctuating pressure across the sand face, and that is not desirable really. So the solution that could be applied, as we all know, could be gas lift. And if that's the case, then uh, attention needs to be paid to what sort of injection rate needs to be applied in the field, what size of orifice needs to be implemented, and whether it should be a venturi orifice or any type of orifice, depending on the amount of gas that we have got to inject, and the depth of the injection. The other solution is obviously reducing the cross-section area of the tubing by inserting a velocity string, and this could be an open-ended string or closed-ended string, and the intention here is to increase the velocity by reducing the cross-section area. Recompletion could be another option, although it's quite an expensive one and not an easy one to go for. And last but not least is the active control, by applying some sort of either smart choke or a control philosophy, depending on the pressures that gets measured at the wellhead. Needless to say that each of these solutions, they have advantages, but also some disadvantages, mainly related to the cost, and needs to be carefully investigated in the selection phase. Now moving into liquid loading. So what is liquid loading? Liquid loading is basically when we have a gas well that is producing some sort of liquid, whether it is a condensate or water, and at some point that gas velocity will not be high enough to carry the liquid droplets and films to the surface. And those starts to accumulate at the bottom of the well and impact the deliverability. So the characteristics of the liquid loading are changes from the friction dominated flow to gravity dominated flow, changes from the annular flow to churn or slug flow. Also, we get a change from stable to unstable flow, and this will show itself in an erratic production. Change in well deliverability, we start to see a noticeable increase in the decline rate, and changing the wellhead pressure, where we see that the wellhead pressure starts to spike from time to time. So if we get that situation, or that basically type of undesired stage in the life of the well, we need to apply a gas deliquification, the so-called gas lift, gas well deliquification. And this is referred to as gas lift dewatering as well, which is generally the technology that is used to either remove the liquid or water or the condensate buildup from the producing gas well. And there are three main techniques that are quite widely used in the industry. Either we go for surveillance, or for chemical implementation, or mechanical implementation. So the surveillance one, it can be applied to mitigate the liquid loading, as I said, but it has limited time usage. And there will be a point in time that the surveillance will not work anymore, because this is where we tend to measure the wellhead pressure and the bottom hole pressure, and either in the cycling way or in the cycling, the techniques of the cycling or the venting, we apply those measurements. But after a point in time, those techniques will not be able to bring the well back to life. So when it comes to cycling, this is where we monitor the wellhead pressure and the bottom hole pressure, and we decide at what point we should close the well, let the liquid to settle, and sweep back into the formation. And based on the wellhead pressure at this point, we will bring the well back to production. So we create a so-called a cycle here, which is efficient in terms of reducing that hydrostatic head that builds up over time in the tubing or across the well by letting it to drain into the formation. But as I said, there will be a point in time that this solution will not work anymore. Venting, on the other hand, is the one that we tend to use in dead gas wells. And the aim here is to achieve the maximum drawdown by opening the well to an atmospheric condition. But due to some environmental concerns, and as we know these days, there is quite a momentum on environmental issues in the oil and gas industry. It is quite common practice to vent the well to a depressurized or low pressure vessel instead. And in addition to all of this, some lines or pipelines also might need to be installed on a temporary basis to direct the fluid to the vessel, right? So that is a kind of additional cost an operation needs to be taken into account if we decide to go for venting. The most commonly used method, however, is chemical implementation. Chemical implementation, we have got surfactants or foam to change the liquid basically to bubble film and increase the exposure of the surface area. So the intention here is that we reduce the liquid density, we reduce the surface tension so that the lower gas velocity can displace the liquid to the surface. One point to consider is that this chemical implementation works best in high water cut wells, as if we have got condensate or oil, they act as a natural deformer and will considerably reduce the effectiveness of the chemical. The way that this could be used is either by liquid batch injection or continuous injection or dropping of soap sticks to the well. The other type of deliquification technique is mechanical. By mechanical, this is possibly the most costly one because we either need to implement something downhole, like a velocity string to increase the velocity of the gas, plunger lift or jet pump, or at surface like a compressor by reducing the wellhead pressure and apply the compressor to basically provide that pressure boost to deliver the gas to the delivery point. Nitrogen lift also could be applied, or gas lift. Again, nitrogen lift might be either continuous or each time that we need to bring the well to production. But all of this mechanical solutions or techniques, they are quite costly, and but possibly they provide the best results. So with this, I will close my presentation. Thanks for your attention. And here I've got my email address if you want to reach out, and my LinkedIn URL. Will be great to connect with every one of you. Again, we open up now for questions, but if we don't get the time to answer all the questions, please feel free to drop me an email. We'll be happy to get back to you.
Thank you very much for that insightful presentation, Ali. So please, if you have questions, kindly drop them in the chat section. But then I'll just go over a brief summary of what we have discussed today. That was a very insightful presentation. I gained a lot. Ali first started by introducing us to the life cycle of the well, from the drilling and completion, startup, ramp up, plateau, decline and abandonment, and then he told us the different scenarios that can occur in the stages of the well. He then introduced us to the different well states, focusing on steady state and transient states. And then for today's discussion, he focused on two particular case studies, which are well-bore slugging and liquid loading. So well-bore slugging is basically alternating flow of liquid and gas in the wellbore. And he mentioned three different types of slugging: the hydrodynamic, the terrain slugging, and the operational slugging. And then he said production engineers classify well slugging across the well either as tubing heading when it's caused by changes downstream the choke, casing heading, which is caused by gas lift issues, or traditional method of drilling wells where wells were drilled without packer, or formation heading, which is when there are pressure rate fluctuations across the sand face. And then he went on to outline the different things that well slugging can cause in the well or in the life cycle of our well bore, which are controlling instability, we have inefficient phase separation, production loss, which we don't want since we want to make money, sand production, gas breakthrough, water coning. And then he also showed us solutions that we can use to mitigate well slugging in our well, such as gas lifts, by maximizing the injection rate or orifice size. He also mentioned recompletion, active control, and he mentioned that each of the techniques have their advantages and disadvantages, disadvantages being mostly due to cost. And then he went on to the second case study for today, which is liquid loading. And then he mentioned that liquid loading had several characteristics, some of which are the change in friction dominated flow, change in pressure, and so on. And then he mentioned gas well deliquification as a method of removing water or condensate. And three major techniques for treating it were the surveillance technique, which had a limited time usage, the chemical technique, which is the most commonly used, where we inject surfactant or foam to change liquid to bubble phase, and then the mechanical technique, which involves injecting nitrogen lifts, gas lifts, compressors, jet plunger, or other mechanical methods to mitigate liquid loading. And then he mentioned that this might be the best resource, but it's costly. So that's just an overview of what we discussed today. Thank you very much, Ali, for that very
Thank you,
insightful
Karen.
presentation. I learned a lot in one sitting, basically an overview of the wellbore dynamics. So at this point, if you have any questions, kindly drop them in the chat section. Ali is welcome to answer your questions. But then without further ado, there is one question already in the chat, so I'm just going to read it out. So it's from Chuk Scary, and he says, thanks for the insightful presentation, Ali. In your opinion, what is the best method in solving high water production, that is high BS and W problems in all production wells?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Chalks, and it's not an easy one. I think before diving into what is the best method to solve the problem, is the first step is to understand the source of the water and where that water is coming from. Really, is it from the aquifer, or do you have like a fractured reservoir, or is it from a layer above your reservoir and tend to find its way into your mainstream, right? But some of the techniques that I came across are, if you are lucky enough and you have a cased cased well, and you perforated your well, and for example you run a PLT and you get an understanding of where this water is coming from, you would then go on and shut off that part of the well. This is applied in cased wells, but as well as in gravel pack wells. I see that, for example, BP and some others, they tend to go for water shut off as their first and most efficient, I would say, approach. But before deciding on what to apply, I think it's quite important to understand where this water is coming from, and then based on that decide. Because if it's an, for example, in an open hole and you get your water from your formation, if your reservoir is fractured, then that might mean a completely different thing, and a completely different solution needs to be applied. In that case, that you might need to go for like polymer or something else, right?
Okay, thank you for that answer, Ali.
No
So
worries.
I have more questions in the chat section. And the next question is from Oluwabi Awutiku. And he says, thanks for a well-delivered presentation, Ali. What has been your experience with oil foam sticks to solve water production problem, just in case water shut-off is not possible?
Um, is this for? I suppose this is for gas wells, right? Because the foam sticks is only applied in gas wells with high water cut. And again, this is a quite commonly applied solution because it's not costly. And if that if that soap stick works well, then it starts to deliver results. And the way of applying it is quite quick. There is not so much production downtime, um, and it works for at least 2 weeks or so, depending on, of course, the size, the amount of water that you have got, and the amount of gas that you are producing. But in general, they tend to work well. They are, as I said, low cost, and they are easy to implement.
Okay, thank you for that feedback, Ali. I have another question in the chat that says, a wonderful presentation, Ali. Thank you. Speaking from a recent experience in OML 40, how can you please highlight more on cycling in a deviated well? Thank you.
Yeah. The cycling technique is not very widely used as such, because you need to have downhole measurements as well as surface measurements. Um, there you can find, I think, two or possibly three SPE papers. And if you want, I'm more than happy to share the number of those SPE papers with you. That one of them we published together with Shell back in time. I mean, Schlumberger and Shell published together. And also recently that there is one or two more papers have been published recently. Um, but the problem with the cycling is that you need to make sure that you have, as I said, downhole pressure measurements, and second, you need to make sure that you do a bit of tedious study to make sure that you optimize that cycle, because no one wants to have their well shut in, for example, for a week or two, right? We all want to keep those wells flowing in an optimum rate and in the best possible fashion. Um, so the problem here is how to design that cycle, um, so there is minimum downtime, but you get result out of this technique, right? Um, have this been applied in a deviated well? In my scenario, we did apply it for a vertical well, not a deviated well. So I cannot really say much on how it's going to work on a deviated well. I would say it would quite a lot depend on that deviation, whether you got a long tangent section, or a less deviated well, because that deviation by itself will tend to induce yeah, will tend to change the flow characteristics by adding to the sleep, right? To the sleep ratio between the gas and the liquid. But if you have got access to a software like Olga Transient Multiphase Flow Simulator, then you would be able to simulate that scenario and look at the results.
Okay, thanks for that response, Ali.
No worries.
So another question says, hi Ali, what would be the diagnostic process if you just unloaded a well and its BHP, that is bottom hole pressure, is dropping drastically and the rate is reduced as well?
Oh my God. I'm really not sure. So you diagnostic process if you just unloaded a well. Does it mean that you have unloaded the well from liquid or drilling fluids? Um, is this a gas well and an oil well? If it's from drilling fluids, then possibly, I don't know, it could be that there is some formation damage issues. Um, it's very difficult to find an answer for this question unless you know the details of that unloading and the type of the well and what has happened actually in the field. But Stella, if you're happy to share more details, please feel free to reach out to my email address, and I will be happy, or even on LinkedIn. I will be happy to have a call or discuss it.
Okay, thank you for that response. So Stella, please provide more feedback. So we have another question, and the question is, how would phase segregation affect well flow dynamics across the life cycle of the well?
Yeah. A The phase segregation, I think we really need to see when and where that phase segregation happens. And we tend to get the phase segregation when the well is either in shut-in, and possibly is waiting for an operation, or you have done an operation and you left some liquid into the well, either whether it is brine or diesel. Um, and then when you want to backstart it, you will see that the phases have changed in the well column. Um, but if it's just during shutting, and let's assume that you have got three phases of water at the bottom, then oil, and then gas on the top. uh, Most of the times you need that gas to be in solution so that it lighten your column and help the well to produce the liquid to the surface. But if that well has given a long time and that phase segregation meant that all the gas is kind of, or most of the gas is kind of came out of solution and trapped on the top, um, then as soon as you open the well, you will see that the gas starts to bleed off and the pressure starts to decline quite quickly. And the well will not be able to displace the liquid to the surface because has got a heavy column behind it, or there sitting there, and the reservoir pressure is not high enough just to push it to the surface. So that phase segregation is quite critical. In some other scenarios, if you wait long enough, that might mean that the water starts to backflow into the reservoir, the Neo-Wellbore area. And it might not be coming from those areas in first place. It might be coming from somewhere else. And if you let it to flush those areas or that porous media, it will start to impact the deliverability of the well afterward when you start the well to production. So the phase segregation, depending on the context, and the stage of the production, and the type of the fluids there, it can certainly affect the well dynamic or the flow dynamics. and needs to be carefully looked into.
Okay, thank you very much. Um, Thank you very much for that answer, Ali. Since there are no other questions, if you have your questions, kindly drop them in the chat box. But for now, there are no other questions in the chat box.
Calvin, sure. I've got your email address here, so I will be in touch.
Okay, thank you very much for that very insightful session. So since there are no more questions, we'll move over to the announcement, and I'd like to call on our publicity chair for the Lagos section to honor us with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen, and thank you very much, Ali, for that insightful presentation.
Pleasure.
For those who would want to go back to this presentation will be shared on our YouTube page. We'll give more information. So we have a lot of upcoming activities from SPE Lagos section. We have held quite a number since the year began, a whole lot of member benefit programs, both technical programs and community development programs, and we're still continuing in that same effort. This Saturday, we have a virtual walk and run for the less privileged. The proceeds from this fitness activity would be channeled towards a children development center. So you have the opportunity to participate in a 10-kilometer race or 5-kilometer race, and then the registration links are just on the flyer. We would communicate that via email, and they're already up on our social media handles. So we would ask that you would join us this Saturday. We look forward to having you come and walk and run. And if you also cannot be a part of that event that day, then you can still register and also make your contributions. There will be fantastic prizes also to be won for the winners of that particular event. We also have a very exciting program for young professionals. It's coming up May 1st, 2021. It's titled Creating Your Own Opportunities in the Energy Industry. And we have a lot of seasoned speakers that have been invited. They'll be addressing various topics. And on the sidelines of that is also a business pitch competition where your business solutions, as we encourage young professionals to also be entrepreneurial in their approach. And three young professionals from the list of persons who will pitch will get the opportunity to win seed money that they can plow into their business and ensure success in their business. So that is holding May 1st. And would you have any inquiries or want to sponsor, then you can contact Kerry or Emeka. Their details are on the screen. This information is also on our various social media handles. And then we have a flagship program coming up. It's being hosted by SP Lagos section on behalf of SP Nigerian Council, and it is the annual technical symposium 2021. It's holding May 11 to May 12, and it will be holding 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. It's foremost industry event. They'll be bringing together various stakeholders to discuss on the subject successful marginal field development in Nigeria, holistic strategies from acquisition to profitability. And it cuts across various stakeholders, operators of JVs, PSAs, MDs and CEOs, industry captains, policymakers, regulators within the oil and gas industry, media persons, various industry professionals. So would you have any inquiries, please send an email to splagos@gmail.com. And very soon the registration information will be shared. So please look out for that and plan to be a part of that discourse, which will feature panel sessions, funding showcases, and case histories, and lots more. Now, progressing further, where can you find SP Lagos section? You can find us on social media or on LinkedIn, SP Lagos section 61. You can find us also on Twitter and Instagram at SP_Lagos. You can find us on Facebook. You can also find us on YouTube. And as a matter of fact, many of the member benefit programs that have been organized, the recordings are shared on our YouTube page. And for you to stay up to date on past events and upcoming events, please ensure to connect, follow, and share so that you can stay informed. Also, there are so many benefits open to members. And would you want to renew your membership in case it has elapsed? Or would you want to become a new member? Please contact spelagos@gmail.com. And you can also copy the other emails on the screen, Chimere and Stella, or call the numbers you can see. And then for you to see the many other benefits that SP provides for you, then you can visit the link that is showing on the screen. With that said, I want to say a big thank you on behalf of the section chair, Michael Oyere. I want to say thank you to everyone who has joined us today from various locations, making out time to come and be enriched technically. And I also want to say a big thank you to Ali Hamid for the very insightful
Thank
lecture
you.
he gave, giving us an overview of the well life cycle and also answering our many questions. And as he said, you can connect with him on LinkedIn and ask further questions. Till the next event, we ask that you stay safe, you adhere to all COVID-19 protocols, and then you stay healthy, and then you stay on top of the game. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Have a wonderful day.
Bye.
Bye.